Hello, everybody. My name is Roy Smith, and I'm an AP English literature teacher at Round Rock High School, which is in Round Rock, Texas. What I'm going to do with Elizabeth Bishop's poem One Art today is do a think aloud. This is just me letting you inside my brain, so to speak, as far as how I might approach a poem for the first time. And I'm just going to give you my first ideas, my first thoughts, the things that I notice. Because when we come to a poem for the first time or the second time or third time, I will go through it and just noticing words and syntax and the flow of it. I'm not really trying to tear it apart or anything like that. I'm just trying to get a feel for what's going on in the poem. In the case of AP literature, the one thing that we know too is most time we'll have a prompt, something that's going to give us a little bit of guidance. So in this hyperdoc, you have a prompt, which is right below the poem. So I would always take a look at that. It says in the following poem, One Art by Elizabeth Bishop, which was published in 1976, the speaker explores the nature of personal loss. Read the poem carefully. Then, in a well-written essay, analyze how Bishop uses poetic elements and techniques to develop the complexities of relationships. So right away, I know that we're dealing somehow with the nature of loss, personal loss, and also that I'm going to be looking for the complexities of relationships. So I know there's going to be some complex relationships within this poem. And this is before I've ever started reading it. So if I skip that part or I don't think that's important, then I'm not going to have the direction that will help me to look at the poem. I'm also going to look at what my lesson direction at the top is, what the focus is. The focus here is identifying moments of tension and the theme of loss. So here we have that idea of loss again. But instead of complexities, we have the word tension. And so as I come down to the poem, I've got these things in mind. I'm not really sure yet exactly what, although I do know there's going to be personal loss, complexities, and tension. And so the way I want to approach this is just I'll read through it and I'll point out some of the things that I would notice. So I would start with the word or the title One Art, which is an interesting title because I know what the word art means. It's a very broad category. It could mean a number of things from sculpture, painting, poetry, music. It could mean anything. But then she puts the word one art. So we're talking about one form of art, one kind of, I don't know yet. It's just one art. So I would have to put that in the side of my brain for just a second because I'm not really sure where that's going to go. So I take a look at the first stanza. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Okay, so I would go back here, and the first thing that would have really jumped out to me would have been the art of losing. The art of losing. That's interesting. I don't consider losing an art. At least it's not something that I would want to do and make into an art form. I guess going back to younger years when you're talking about be a good loser or something like I don't know. I wouldn't know what to do with that. The art of losing isn't hard to master. And then I would also probably have thought, well, it would have been hard for me to master because I didn't like to lose. I still don't really like to lose. So it's kind of an interesting opening line. And then we go, so many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Okay, I kind of see where she's going. Maybe there was a little bit, but things are filled with the idea of being lost. And since she says their loss is no disaster, I'm going to assume this is little things, maybe, I don't know, losing a paper, losing just something of no consequence. I find the word disaster would have been something I focused on too, because while we're not studying poetic form in this particular poem, this is a villanelle, and I know there's going to be some repetition. So repetition of the word disaster is going to have an interesting line. So I would have not done much other than notice things like the art of losing, and losing some things is no disaster. Okay. And art, again, art of losing. That would have really stayed with me. The second stanza, lose something every day. Accept the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So right now I have the art of losing isn't hard to master, which kind of combines the wording up here and puts it into a line here. And so lose something every day. Okay. I'm not to that stage yet, but I understand what they're saying there. I tend to misplace things, my glasses, my pen, which is a big one with me. Even my students would tell you I misplace my coffee cup all the time. They have to help me find it. And so I accept the fluster of that, the fluster of something like losing my door keys, the hour badly spent, which I think we can all plead guilty to that one, that hour that I wasted watching reruns of The Big Bang Theory when I should have been doing work. But it's kind of a lighter, everyday, kind of common human experience in the second stanza. So then I move on to the third stanza, then practice losing farther, losing faster. This is something that would have probably made me stop and think, because losing farther, losing faster, interesting, farther and faster. That's I'm not quite. I love the alliteration. I like the repetition there of farther and faster. But then she tags on places and names and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. Okay, this is a definite step up from the kind of a little bit of the triviality of the first two stanzas. So I'm starting to pay attention to the build of even the tension. I'm not sure the complexity. For me, the tension is building here a little bit, because the idea of losing is gaining speed, just like the line is gaining speed. And so I'm going to start paying attention more, because I can feel this building. But none of these, she builds a little bit of tension in these lines, but it seems to me she's letting it off. This is like a release here. None of these will bring disaster, and which is true, right? So now we have the introduction of the I, and I always pay very close attention to pronouns when I'm reading a poem. So I notice here that we have I. I lost my mother's watch. And look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So we're back to the art of losing. So clearly the idea of one art up there has to do with this notion of art of losing things and it not being hard to master. So she starts with losing her mother's watch. Now that could, we don't know the story behind that. That could have been a very serious thing, or it could have been a trivial thing. We don't really know. But she goes, and look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. This to me builds again the intensity of the poem as it's going along. There's definitely a build here. Now she's talking about losing houses. And this could be something like moving as a child or moving later, because I think it's more as a child, because she's talking about losing her mother's watch here. But the art of losing still isn't hard to master. These are things that are typical losses that humans, all of us, very few people, at least in our day today, live in the same house for their entire lives. But as children, I know that I lived in the same house for 10 years. And so that's kind of the image that came back to me. And then moved to a succession of houses after that. And so I know what she's saying here. This loss is building. And then continuing with the poet talking about I in the next stanza, she goes, I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I miss them, but it wasn't a disaster. This takes it to from the trivial to forgetting your keys, spending an hour wasted, to she's lost cities. I moved to Texas from California, so in my home in a mountain resort in Southern California, and so I lost that city. Yes, a lovely one, and vaster some realms. I love her word choice here of realms. This is just so much bigger. A realm. I mean, that was my realm as a child and as an adult raising my own children. I owned, where these were realms I owned. I knew it. I knew everything about it. So that's what would have popped into my head. And 2 rivers, for me, it was a lake, a continent. I've never lost a continent because I've never left this continent. But this just shows to me, the nature of losses we all face, the way that life changes, that everything is changeable. right? Except the only thing we can count on for sure is that change will happen. And so she misses them, as most of us miss things when we leave, but it wasn't a disaster. So to me, this poem, to this point, yes, there's tension in there because none of us likes to lose um, the things we become comfortable with. I think that we can all really relate to that. But as a reader of poetry, when I come to this final stanza, the thing that would have stopped me for a minute, and it always does, no matter which poem, this is one thing I always notice is this punctuation, like this dash here. And this dash is not to be toyed with. It's something that I really have to look at because to me, in punctuation in poetry is intentional. She thought about this. What does she want me to do with this dash? And to me, I always picture the poet, at least here, I feel like her taking a breath, even losing you. So now, who is this you? And she's lost this person, losing you. That really sticks out to me. She lost her. Did she die? I don't know. And then in parentheses here, the joking voice, a gesture I love. Okay, now I have more idea because this is in, you always notice, I always notice the tenses I love. So she loves the gesture, this joking voice of this person, this you. But then she bleeds right in with no hesitation. I shan't have lied. Here is the tension for me is that she should not have lied. What did she lie about? And she lost her. Did she lose her because of the lie? That would have stopped me because that's the tenseness for me. And then she immediately goes away from that and says, it's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, and then she puts in these parentheses, almost as though I would have said, I wonder if she's talking to herself. She's almost yelling at herself with that exclamation point. Although losing it may look like disaster. And she says, write it. And so that for me, and notice that the word right is italicized, almost that's, she did, again, she does that on purpose, almost emphasizing that, write it. She's just exhorting herself to write it. It looks like disaster. It may look like disaster. In this case, I might have had to ask myself, maybe it was a disaster, right? That she's not talking about just losing watches or names. So that's how those are the things that would have popped out to me as the first time I'm reading this poem. And that would have been just my first time. It doesn't mean by any stretch of the imagination that I'm done reading or considering the poem. Then I go back to the prompt. I go back and I really look at this again. And then I go back to the places in the poem where I felt tension, where I felt tension in a few different places, but I felt it most in the last stanza, but you might have seen tension that was important in other places. And I would sit on that and develop the idea of the relationships in this poem. And then I would go through it probably again and starting to formulate how I might attack that prompt with evidence, commentary, and most importantly, a defensible thesis statement that directly answers the prompt. So that's my read aloud. I encourage you to go through and do more reading, more considering, and then you'll be more than prepared to write an awesome response. Bye.